Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Here comes Ahmed Odunton. Today's very important topic is also a question. And that question is, are we Africans guilty of transatlantic slave trade? I was actually working on a very different topic titled, Where Did Slavery Go? Before I stumbled on a video on my WhatsApp status. The video, which I investigated further and found on YouTube, was of an African bishop blaming African traditional institutions for transatlantic slave trade. Before I stumbled on that video, I have been in the dock multiple times where our American brothers have battered Africans, have accused Africans of being responsible for selling our own brothers and sisters to European slave traders. Many of you Africans in diaspora must have also found yourself in similar situations where you had to defend or accept these accusations depending on the width and depth of your intellect. This is a very important subject that requires tons of sense to be able to do justice to it. However, I am forced to do this video because a bishop, before a huge congregation, placing blame or guilt for transatlantic slave trade on the head and shoulders of African traditional institutions, is a dangerous avenue to spread mass ignorance. I totally disagree with his placement of guilt, and I wondered what the position of some of his learned listeners are. I bet there are well-educated people among his listeners, professors, doctors, lawyers, and intellectuals. I wondered if they let their bishop get away with such intellectual carelessness. They'd one or some of them have the heart and balls to be kind and brave enough to engage, enlighten, or respectfully check the bishop behind closed doors. I am always worried when I see religious leaders using the pulpit to spread the disease of ignorance. That is such a powerful platform that reaches millions of people. And these people have a tendency to think religious leaders know better. But without disrespect, I can say with all the strength in my lungs that each and every time religious leaders have mounted the pulpit to comment on sociological and political matters, they have always, or most times, they have always misspoke. Even the scriptural stories they are supposed to be able to, they are supposed to specialize in telling, has always been misrepresented, misconstructed, and misconstrued. Misrepresented to favor the ruling class of the day. And most of them belong to the opium Bible school of thoughts that school the people to be meek and to turn the other cheek. And slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you will obey Christ. That is their school of thoughts. They don't say nothing about the revolutionary life of Christ. Jesus was a revolutionary. Jesus was a rebel against the existing order. He feared no death, and that was why he died young. I'm not asking for us to throw ourselves into the cold and chilly arms of death. But when we are paralyzed by fear in the face of injustice, how close are we to Christ to be able to call ourselves Christians? False Christians. Without too many digressions. The topic for today is, are we Africans guilty of transatlantic slave trade? First, we must note that slavery is as old as humanity, and there were different types of slavery. In several books of the Bible, such as Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, we have abundant evidence of biblical slavery. As a matter of fact, in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, Jesus said, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, as you would obey me. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eyes is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart." Thus, right there is one out of many scriptural examples that acknowledges the practice of slavery. Under the slavery described in the scripture, slavery, however, had legal protections. However, outside of the Bible, different ancient civilizations, African, Asian, European, Middle Easterners, Haiti, all practiced slavery. And mind you, there were very many different kinds of slavery. For example, you can sell your own self into slavery to pay off a debt. You can sell your daughter or son into slavery to pay off a family debt. Then they become free after the debt is paid off. Second, thousands of years of history has shown that mankind is the most violent creature ever created by God. His thirst for violence and war is insatiable. God is omniscient, but I'm not sure he truly wanted this. And in ancient African civilizations, just like any other civilizations that existed, even up to this moment that we are speaking, there were always lots of internecine tribal wars where humans, men, women, children were trophies and spoils of war. And these spoils of war and these human spoils of war become servants or slaves for those that can afford them. The royal class, the warlords, the rich, or the well-to-do. Sometimes they are conscripted into the military. That type of slavery was usually as a result of military clashes and conquests. For example, when you chart the praises of somebody from Ibadan, you say Ibadan maja maja, tó fi kó ara wájú lẹ́rú. It is important to note the part that says ara iwájú, outsider, because I might make reference to that a little later. This type of intertribal slavery that existed within the same race was benign and mild compared to the one which we are about to discuss, which is interracial. Now to the transatlantic slave trade, for which our American brothers have been sticking accusing fingers in our eyes for. The transatlantic slavery was the height and peak of human bestiality and cruelty because it was built on a racial theory, a theory that postulated, a theory that claimed that the black man of the world is inferior, that the black man is quarter of an inch superior to animals, that is not a full, wholesome human, that he lacked civilized language, that his mother tongue is vernacular, that his religion is of that of the devil, that they, the Europeans, that they, the white men, owe it to God, that they have a divine duty to tame and domesticate these wild creatures. Thus, I say it with all the teeth behind my lips, that racial ideology was the fulcrum of transatlantic slavery. It is intentional that I am starting to take the word trade out of transatlantic slavery. Because when you do yourself the favor of taking off your shades and wear the surgical glasses or use a pair of binoculars and you take a deep technical look at the ideological basis of transatlantic slavery, and you still call that a trade, as in transatlantic slave trade, I'm sorry, you are dangerous. And I say you are dangerous because you are ignorant. And when you too attain the position of a bishop someday, and you mount the pulpit to spread ignorance, you won't merely be spreading a disease, you would be creating a pandemic, and that is serious. Serious because you can reach 1 million people who trust you and think gullibly that you know better. The word trade, by its constitution and connotation, suggests business relations between or among equal. Trade that is fair and legitimate. But how can that be called trade, which is already built on an idiot theory of racial superiority by the buyer? So if Africans of that era thought whatever was happening was trade, I tell you authoritatively that the Europeans, Arabs, did not believe it was trade. Whatever they offered in their own minds and deep down their hearts was necessary to lubricate, was necessary to oil the logistics of ensuring that men, women, and children reach the coastal areas, that they reach the ports. Because they could not, by themselves, come into the hinterlands to hunt us. First, they do not know the terrain well enough, and most important, they lack the adaptability to that environment, which meant they would be wiped out by natural elements, natural means, in an age where there was barely any medical developments. So the guns that they were giving to us in exchange was merely to hunt our own selves down. And also Africans of that time, because they had no means to travel of their own accord, of their own free will to Europe to see the kind of racial superiority based slavery the white men invented. So they do not have first-hand knowledge of the atrocious and brutal nature of transatlantic slavery. Transatlantic slavery happened not because the Europeans wanted slaves. It happened because they needed slaves. They needed slave labor to power the engines of the Industrial Revolution. Now, let me ask you, let us assume, for the sake of arguments, that Africans said no. Do you not think that this race, believing so much in its own racial superiority, which is a lie, but which in fact has military superiority, so do you not think they would have used military force to take whatever they believed they needed and entitled to? Do you really think they would hesitate? Capital no, sir. Capital no, ma. So now, we must have been so naive to innocently believe that interracial slavery practiced at home was the same as interracial transatlantic slavery. Thus, the transatlantic slavery, which does not qualify to be recognized as a trade, is an invention based on the demonic calculus of racial superiority. They had the military advantage, but they did not use military force to take us, because if they had to go deep into the hinterlands by themselves, they would have succumbed to natural elements. Because that was a time medical development was minimal. They would not survive. So at a time when paper money was not so popular, but trade was mostly by barter, they had to give guns and arms in exchange for men. Guns which we turned against our own selves. Guns which we used to hunt our own brothers and sisters. Now, after that, then came colonialism at the twilight of transatlantic slavery. Colonialism was about the sacking of the existing traditional political institutions and replacement by colonial structures. Be reminded that the scramble for Africa, where at the Berlin Conference of 1884, Africa was sliced up among European powers with the agenda to rape the continent of our treasures. Up to this day, Africa is still being raped. So every African traditional leaders who stood up against colonialism were either deposed, exiled, or killed. So do you want to tell me that African traditional leaders of that time invited them to come and upstage them and take over Africa? Of course, no. Even this year, when Niger asked France to leave, Niger was threatened. It was threatened with military action. France said it would defend our national interests with military force if need be. So defend your national interest in Africa against Africans. Under King Leopold's reign of terror in the Free States of Congo, over 20 million Africans were either maimed or killed. If you could not meet your daily quota of work, your hands were chopped off. So did African traditional rulers invite the European to come and colonize them? No. Colonialism was another act based on the theory of social Darwinism, which says Europeans should colonize Africa in order to spread their superior civilization, which is a lie. But look, the problem with that is, because if we had the agenda of racial superiority, if we believed that our civilization was superior, if we had the intention or ambition to dominate other races, and we had the military advantage to back that up, and we chose to take a step in that direction, then Europe will be speaking our own language or languages. Europeans will be practicing our own traditional religion, our culture, our ways of life. So these are the things that comes with military conquest. I say to you that Africans are not guilty of transatlantic slavery. I saw the videos of African kings going to the United States to apologize on behalf of the past generations of kings. That is misplaced apology. The black men of the world, wherever you are, whether you are in Africa or outside of Africa, was a victim of slavery and the colonial crimes of Europeans. So instead of trading blames, we should unite and join hands together, not trading blames, accusations, saying they were talking about transatlantic slavery was a trade. It wasn't a trade. It is transatlantic taking. It wasn't a trade. Thank you for your time. God bless you.